Recording. Great. Now, as we all know, the Western US is in the second year of a historic drought, with most of California currently facing extreme or exceptional drought conditions. Already this year, we've seen the news about wells in rural communities running dry, farmers who are leaving their fields fallow or having to forego crops they've already planted due to irrigation restrictions, and of course, the devastating wildfires that are enabled by these exceptionally dry conditions. Today, we're joined by an all-star lineup of speakers who will talk about the impact of the drought on our communities and on the electric sector. At the nexus of water and energy is, of course, hydroelectric power. Hydro is an emissions-free resource, but its production has been significantly reduced over the last couple of years by the ongoing drought. We'll hear more on the impacts of reduced hydroelectric generation from Mark Rothletter, Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for the California Independent System Operator, which manages our bulk electric grid. Of course, the drought also means that we have to manage our water supply differently. We'll also hear from Paul Sellier, Operations Director at the Marin Municipal Water District, on water supply conditions, changes to reservoir operations, pumping, and emergency drought projects. We'll also be joined by Will Drayton, Director of Technical Viticulture, Sustainability, and Research at Treasury Wine Estates, on how his organization is tracking water use in vineyards and in winery operations. And finally, we'll hear from Julia Hatton, President and CEO of the Rising Sun Center for Opportunity, who will address the challenges the drought presents for frontline environmental justice communities, as well as opportunities to prepare young folks in frontline communities for high quality jobs in water and energy conservation. In Sacramento this year, the drought and its impacts are a strong theme for this legislative session, including the realm of energy policy. Some of the most significant efforts focus on diversifying our emissions-free electric technologies. More diversity in our generation portfolio will ensure that our electric supply can be cleaner and also more resilient during future droughts. This session, MCE has been pleased to support bills that would spur development of clean energy technologies like offshore wind and green hydrogen. We're also supporting budget allocations that would provide critical market development support for these emerging technologies, including many different kinds of long duration storage. We're also working to get fossil fuels out of our end uses of energy by supporting bills that would transition more buildings from gas to electricity for things like space and water heating. We're also particularly excited about significant budget allocations to support vehicle electrification so that we can move away from gas-powered vehicles towards cleaner options like battery electric cars and buses and trucks that are powered by green hydrogen fuel cells. All of these technologies will help California move away from the fossil fuels that are causing climate change and contributing to the drought conditions that we're experiencing today. For MCE, it's clear that today's power mix isn't going to be tomorrow's power mix, and we're working hard across all of our teams to build a clean, green, and reliable energy future. Since our formation, we've worked hard to eliminate emissions across our portfolio so that we can do our part to slow the pace of climate change. Our approach includes not only clean electricity, but also a strong focus on energy efficiency and a suite of programs designed to help all of our customers reduce their usage, lower their bills, and shrink their emissions footprint. We're diversifying our energy sources so that we can be nimble and reliable in the event of natural disasters and other climate change impacts. This includes not only new kinds of electric generation, but also programs like our demand flex market, which encourages customers to reduce their usage during key times of high stress on the grid. And we're working to identify additional ways our programs can continue to meet the evolving needs of our customers and our communities in the nexus of water and energy. So with all of this in mind, we'll turn now to our panel of experts. First up, please join me in welcoming Mark Rothletter, Senior Vice President and COO for the California ISO.
Thank you, Stephanie. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Mark.
Great, thank you. Well, thank you for this important topic and this important discussion, especially this year, and it'll probably be an important discussion going into the future. If you can go to the next slide, I just want to give some context about the hydro system and how much we rely on it for electric energy. We know that the hydro system has multiple uses. including agricultural and water service. But one of the important uses is producing electricity. And there's about 12,000 megawatts of capacity that is hydro capacity, but that capacity doesn't always produce at full output and dependent on the amount of water that is being stored and available for energy. And if you look to the right, this information from the California Energy Commission illustrates the fact that the amount of energy that is used to serve load from hydro systems really varies year to year depending on the hydro conditions, and it ranges from 7 to 22% of the load is being served by hydro supplies. Last year it was about 11%, and I suspect this year will be closer to 2014-15 conditions, which was closer to 7%. Next slide, please. So one thing to be aware of on the use of the electric energy from the hydro system is, fortunately, we're able to have, there is some storage behind the dam. And so the hydro systems can, there is some flexibility in conserving the stored energy for those times and those days when we need it. So we store that energy as much as we can for the summer conditions, and we store it so that we can use it mainly more so in the evening peak hours than we do in the midday when we have abundance of other supply. So the typical pattern is that the hydro system will be ramped up probably from about 5 p.m. to 9 p.m. when the loads are the highest during the summer. And generally speaking, that peaking capability exists. However, under severe drought years, there is a lack of energy that translates into potential reduction of energy used or energy generated in other times. And if it's in some cases, like I'll get into a little bit later, like there are resources that the hydro system has gotten so low that it cannot produce. And so we do have a situation this year where we have about 1,000 megawatts less generating capacity, even at peak, due to the fact that some of the hydro systems are so low. These graphs here illustrate how we produce what's called at the net peak, and that's kind of that 7 to 8 p.m. hour, and it's the confluence of when solar production is going down and load is still increasing. Next slide, please. So in terms of the hydro conditions this year, I think we're all aware, but this kind of just illustrates the fact that the dark blue line is the snowpack and how the snowpack has depleted and how it compares to other years. The red line is a maximum year from 1990. I can't even see this, 1992 to 1993. The lighter blue line below was actually a drought year 2014 to 2015, and the light blue shadow in the back is the average. So we're well above average. That's one thing to observe. And this is the different watersheds, north, central, and south watersheds in California. The other thing to notice is that the snowpack basically depleted roughly late May, early June. In other words, there was no more runoff during that time. And what we observe is that during drought conditions, the soil is so dry, even whatever runoff you do get, oftentimes will go into the soil and not get to the watersheds or the dams that are able to produce electricity. Next slide, please. Once the snow does melt, it goes into the reservoirs, and that is where downstream the energy is produced. So the ability for those reservoirs to produce energy and the effectiveness and the efficiency of being able to produce electricity does depend on the height and the amount of energy stored behind the reservoir. If you look at Lake Oroville, where the amount of stored energy or the water is about 34% of historical average or 23% of capacity. It has gotten so low at Oroville that the electricity no longer can be produced there. So it's a loss of about 644 megawatts of electricity supply as a result of the low reservoir levels at that location. And that's similar in other parts of the system. There are some reservoirs that are near 100%, and that's due to the uses and the availability of water coming into those systems. Next slide, please. Why is this all happening? Well, as Stephanie indicated, we are in exceptional drought conditions over 80% of the California system. And that's really causing these conditions in terms of the availability of water and the energy from the water system. Next slide, please. It's not just California that's experiencing this drought. If you compare here, if you look at the hydro conditions across the entire West, you can see 2021 is actually a significant event in terms of low water hydro conditions across not just California, but across the West, where there is severe or exceptional drought conditions. That's important because not only do we rely on energy produced from the hydro system in California, but we do also rely on hydro energy from the Northwest. And if that system is also constrained or limited by the hydro conditions, that has a doubling effect because it affects our ability to get imported energy from outside the area. At the same time, we're having challenges getting energy from resources in California. The most significant event is if there is during a summer condition, if there is a west-wide heat event, whereby the demand for electricity is high across the West and in California, that becomes then a constraining issue for California. Next slide, please. So as we continue the transformation of the energy system, electricity system, we are seeing other new sources of energy. One of the significant changes this year is the amount of battery storage that we see on the system. We added about 1,500 megawatts of battery storage. Now, this is about a 4-hour storage. So unlike hydro, where you can store for long periods of time with large amounts of energy, seasonally and so forth, batteries store basically for the day, and you use the energy stored from the abundant energy during the early part of the day, and you use it in the latter part of the day. But this is at least a innovative, evolving solution, and we will see continuing amounts of battery storage being added to the system to supplement other resources, emitting resources, and maintaining that need for meeting the evening peak. With that, I will hand it back to Stephanie.
Thank you so much for that, Mark. As a reminder, folks, feel free to raise your hand to get into the question queue or drop questions into the chat for our panelists. Next up, we'd like to welcome Paul Sellier, Operations Director at the Marin Municipal Water District. Paul, take it away.
Yeah, good afternoon. Thanks, Mark. That was really interesting. And we'll see some of those themes repeated here. To respect folks' time, I do have quite a few slides, so let's move on. This is a picture of one of our reservoirs in better times. We're going to step through and just give you a quick introduction to who Marin Water is. We're the oldest municipal water district in California, formed in 1912 with the designation of Special District Number 1. We serve about 190,000 people in Marin County, largely along sort of the eastern populous corridor of 101 and central and southern Marin. We have sort of a unique in the way that we have over 20,000 acres of land that we manage. And so our mission is a dual purpose one, that we manage our natural resources and that we provide drinking water, high quality drinking water. Next slide. This is a map just showing our service area and giving some statistics. Our annual precipitation is a little bit unusual. We've got 52 inches of rain on average. If you were to cross the Golden Gate to San Francisco, their average is closer to 25 inches per year. So we have 5 reservoirs on sort of the Mount Tam watershed, and you can see in the upper left corner of the inset here that we've got Sulahuli Reservoir out in West Marin and Nicasio as well. Our total reservoir storage then is about 80,000 acre feet, serving a demand of about 28,000 acre feet. We augment that supply with about 5,000 acre feet of imported water from Sonoma County. And we also have environmental stream releases that we need to account for from the reservoirs. And they average about 12,500 acre feet per year. All in all, the total demands on our system is pretty close during a normal year to 40,000 acre feet. And so with about 80,000 acre foot of storage, you could say we have about a 2-year water supply. Next slide. This is, after all, an energy discussion, so it wouldn't be complete without just a couple of hits on water and energy. And just noting, every form of energy generation, whether it's petroleum distillation or whether it's, biofuels production, they all require significant quantities of water. And every water production technology requires energy, whether it's moving the water from the reservoir to the treatment plant, or whether it's adding ozone, which of course requires significant energy to create it, usually created from liquid oxygen. And then these resources have in common the fact that they're both under stress. You can see a picture of our Nicasio Reservoir on the right here, and that was taken a few months ago now, so it's even drier than that. Next slide. So if we had an energy footprint in Marin, most of our customers are single family residences. And if you wanted to look at our energy fingerprint, this is sort of what it would look like in gray here. With a peak use in the morning hours from about 6 to 8 a.m. And then it drops off significantly with a sort of a smaller peak in the evening that Mark was just referring to. We've done our best to try to offset our energy demand by shifting and pumping outside of those hours. So you can see in the 4 to 9 p.m. window, it's not our highest energy use. Next slide. Looking at how we use electric energy in our water system, the vast majority of it is moving water around, whether that's moving water from the lakes to the treatment plants. You saw the Sulahuli Reservoir and the Nicasio Reservoir, they're quite far away from our treatment plants. And of course, we have 980 miles of distribution piping serving those 191,000 customers. And you are all, I'm sure, familiar with Marin County, lots of hills and valleys. So significant amounts of pumping for the water. You can see our total energy cost for electricity there over the last 5 years or so, and last year about $5 million. Next slide. So what are we doing about this energy use? And some of it Mark had already hit. So we're participating in energy aggregation. So if there's a pressure on the system and they need some relief, we're participating with a firm, and if we can, we'll shut down pumps and try to alleviate our demand on the system. We've looked at batteries for shaving of peak power, that same issue of peak demand when the sun is setting and the solar production is dropping, but energy demand is still high. We've yet to find a successful application for batteries. And of course, we've done quite a bit of work on solar installations, and we've identified a number of tanks for future solar as well. In addition to that, we're participating with UC Davis on a study for microturbines. We know for sure there are a couple places that we could install microturbines, but UC Davis will hopefully identify additional spots for us to do that. Next slide. And of course, I didn't hit on that previous slide, the drought, right? Drought is a tremendous efficiency driver. And so, but before we get into drought, let's look at our water supply storage. The line with the blue line at about 30,000 on the left-hand column side of the chart there, marked 21, 22. That's where we currently are. We're at about 30,000 acre feet of storage right now, about 38% of our total capacity. And the only time we've been lower than that was in 76, 77. And the main reason for that is after 76, 77, we actually increased reservoir storage substantially. So this drought that we're experiencing is historic for us in nature. Next slide. As we look to project out into the future and consider what would happen if the drought continued at the same levels that we've just experienced over the past winter. So same amount of rainfall and runoff were to repeat, even with 20% to 40% conservation measures by our customers. You can see where these storage levels would project out to in 2022. So it does look like in the second half of next year that under these conditions, that our storage levels would drop to the sort of 10,000 acre foot level that we're calling an uncertainty level. And the reason for that is as reservoir levels get low, the water quality in the reservoirs deteriorates. And we're not certain how well it will be treated, whether there'll be taste and odors and things like that. Next slide. So how do we adapt to drought? There are three things we can do. Operational initiatives, right? We've used reservoirs that we don't normally use. Phoenix Lake, a very small reservoir, 300 acre feet of water, but it's in one of the most high trafficked areas in our watershed. So it's sort of a harbinger, or canary, if you like, for our customers to look at early on in April when that reservoir was empty. Sulhuli Reservoir is furthest away and the costliest for us to use. That reservoir has been almost completely used at this point. And even late last year in early 2020, we started optimizing our supplemental water from Sonoma, trying to bring in as much of that supply as we could. And of course, we operate a recycled water facility in the Terra Linda area of Marin, and we've recently opened up a residential fill station for our customers to be able to go to and pick up water for free so that they can take that home and irrigate their plants with it. Next slide. So we have also implemented emergency and mandatory rationing in the sense that our customers really are asked to irrigate only one day a week. And each city in Marin has been designated a day. And the idea for that is that we're able to patrol and identify customers who either are unaware that there are restrictions on irrigation and provide them with education. And for those that are aware, we can issue them warnings and fines as needed. We're focused on outdoor irrigation at the moment because that's the biggest use of water during the summertime. Essentially, our demand for water doubles during the summertime. Next slide, please. So how are we doing in terms of conservation? Really pretty well at the moment. Our customers are saving about 30% on a weekly comparison basis. Our baseline is a 3-year average demand, and we're using about 30% less than that week on week. We'd like to see more, but the customers are doing very well at this point. Next slide. So again, back to this planning projection, just a reminder that we're looking at additional need for water, middle to end of next year. Next slide. So the options that we've come up with to look at, and there's just a couple that I'm going to talk about here. One is a desalination. And based on the timing that we just saw, so the middle of next year, means that any desalination facility would need to be temporary And that means essentially they're limited in capacity. Temporary, just because the timing to construct a full-scale permanent desalination facility on San Francisco Bay would probably take 2 to 3 years at lightning speed. So these containerized units are on the market. They exist already, but limited in capacity. Next slide. And so this slide takes a little bit of time to load. It has a lot of detail on it. And the concept of a water transfer is basically taking water from somewhere else in California and moving it to Marin for use. In this area, our water would be sourced from the Sacramento River or the American River and would come to us through, you see here on the right, at the Freeport intake and into the East Bay Mud transmission system, and to the east side of the Richmond Bridge, where new facilities that Marin Water would need to construct, including a pump station and about 8 miles of pipeline across the bridge, as well as some improvements to our distribution system, are being contemplated. It does look promising at the moment that this concept could work in the time frame that we need it and provide the quantity of water that we need. Next slide. Costs for both of these water supply options are not insignificant, with desal, including the operating costs for a year of a small desal plant, on the order of $40 million all in. Again, it could be delivered theoretically within the 12 months or so that we need. It is somewhat capacity limited, and the regulatory process for desalination on San Francisco Bay is somewhat questionable. And the fact is that nobody has constructed any desalination facilities on San Francisco Bay. Water transfers, on the other hand, I think hundreds of water transfers occur every year in California. The project does look deliverable within the time frame that we need. It appears that the quantity of water that we might need, between 10 and 15,000 acre feet, is also available, and we're working on securing that. The regulatory processes for this are well defined, and while it's a very tight schedule for such a complex project, it appears to be feasible, at least in concept at this point. We are working through that feasibility, and we'll have that completed shortly. Next slide. So in summary, our water supply, like a lot of water agencies, is threatened and continues to be threatened by drought. We've seen repeated droughts throughout certainly this most recent century, and all indications are that will be a more frequent occurrence as we go forward. Demand reductions are very effective, but in the case of continued drought or long period droughts, are they enough? Supplemental water supply options, on the other hand, are very costly and complex. And that concludes my presentation today.
Thank you, Paul. That's some incredibly sobering information and data you've shared with us. Just as a reminder, please feel free to keep those questions coming in the chat, and we will address all of the questions at the end of our presentations. Next up, we'd like to welcome Will Drayton, Director of Technical Viticulture, Sustainability, and Research at Treasury Wine Estates. Take it away, Will.
Thanks, Stephanie. That's great. So hi, my name is Will, and I work for Treasury Wine Estates. I'm not sure if everyone knows the company Treasury Wine Estates, but you probably know some of our wineries that we have. We have some of the best wineries up and down the coast of California. A lot of them based in Napa, but also Sonoma and the Central Coast. Names like Beringer, Chateau Saint Jean, Stag's Leap, Provenance, Beaulieu Vineyards, and others. Even 19 Crimes, if you've seen that there, our recent collaboration with Snoop. Definitely go and get a bottle there and check out the virtual reality when he's dancing around the label. It's something pretty special. Anyway, water, it's just interesting listening to all the speakers so far. You know, the nexus between energy and water is just as important in the wine industry as it is anywhere else. And we have similar costs for electricity demands for moving water and for treating water as does everyone else. And so the solutions we have are similar to, but downscale to what it maybe a water district might have, or even what you do at home as well, in a different funny way. So I'll talk through some of that. But I got a feeling that maybe not everyone knows exactly what we use water for in the wine industry. You know, there is almost no water that goes into wine. So next slide. My first slide is almost completely inaccurately labeled. Unlike brewing, where a large portion of the product that's made is water. The only water that comes into wine, pretty much, aside from a little bit of dilution and things like that, is from the grapes themselves. So it's the rain that falls from the sky. It's the irrigation that we put underneath the vines. They suck that up, they make it into the fruit. And then we press that in the winery, and that is the wine that we have. So where do we actually use water then? Well, obviously in the field, it's an irrigation source. California has been great, and especially coastal California for a long time, with drip irrigation, which is a very efficient form of irrigation that was developed in Israel, but that's been in California for decades now. And what that means is that we can very precisely drop water exactly where we need it in the vineyard, rather than watering all the weeds and everything else around the place. We can ensure that it's just the vines that are getting the water that they need. It also means that we have pretty good control over the timing and the amount. And luckily for us, grapevines evolved in an environment where they don't need to use a lot of water. They're Mediterranean plants, so they're used to dry summers and wet winters. Hopefully we get some wet winters again soon. That would be great for all of us. But the quality of our wines is better when we have somewhat limited water. And that's good for obviously the type of wine that you're going to end up with in the bottle, but also good for our costs in doing it. We need to pump less groundwater or move less water around the vineyard if we're able to kind of hold back on the irrigation. And often irrigation is the best sort of throttle on how far or fast a grapevine is growing. So if you put too much water on, you actually end up spending more money, picking off leaves or hedging or pruning those vines or changing the canopy architecture, so to make sure that the grapes are well exposed and have the right growing environment. So it's really important for us to know how much water we're putting on, know how the plants are doing with it, and then know the resulting wine quality. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about in the next few slides, and I don't have many, is around technology that we use to kind of really fine tune our water use. A lot of the water demand is driven by the atmosphere, so we need to know what's going on there. And a lot of the storage we have, instead of is in reservoirs for the plants, is actually in the ground. So measuring groundwater is really important. So then the other source of water that we need water for is our winery operations, making wine. And mostly that's just like at home. What do you need water for? Well, aside from washing yourselves and washing your dishes and washing your clothes, there's maybe not anything else that's particularly essential. So we clean our tanks after we've made wine in them, or once we transferred from one tank to another. And that's the primary use. But we also use it in cooling, and cooling is a place where water and energy come really closely together. And so efficiency is incredibly important in the winery in terms of reducing our energy needs and water needs simultaneously. We'll get into that a little bit. We are working also with UC Davis on some technologies that are going to really help us transform what we do and hopefully transform the wine industry in terms of being a really conscious consumer of energy and water. Next slide, please. So this is a little picture of a grapevine. I stole it from a company that makes grapevine sensing machines called pressure chambers. And you don't need to know the details of that, but basically you've got the atmospheric demands, is how hot and dry and humid or not humid it is. That's driving the use of water up into the air. And then in the soil, you've got your reservoir of water that you're using up. And then you've got the vine in the middle, that's kind of regulating and hanging on to the water it needs is making the same decision as Marin in terms of trying to conserve water so that it's going to be able to get through until the winter months. So next click. So what do we do? Well, in order to be really accurate on how we're applying that water, we need to measure the atmosphere. So we have some really cool technologies. We have these micro weather stations. There's one there you can see. That's over in our Carnaris region. And that's like a little Frisbee-sized device that has its own cell modem in there. It's sensing the amount of light that comes in. It's actually got a drum skin on the top of it that counts the raindrops coming through in the winter. And that tells us how much rain has happened, as well as having downwards facing cameras that check out the amount of greenness that's reflecting off the ground, and then temperature, humidity. All of those factors can be turned into what we call evapotranspiration, which is basically the evaporation from the ground, and then the transpiration, which is water loss from the vines. So we know how much water is being lost every day. So if we replace that every day, then things should be exactly the same. Next slide, next click. So we also have this great device for a company called Thule. There's a guy I was at school with out of UC Davis called Tom Chaplin developed a thing, and it's incredibly simple in its concept. It's a little thermocouple, a little temperature sensor, and it measures packets of warm air wafting off the top of the vineyard or whatever crop you're growing there. And with that, it can give you a real-time water loss across maybe an acre or so of land. And you can use that water loss calculation to figure out how much water you want to put back in. So you're not putting more than you need to. Next click. The next thing you can do instead of measuring the sky is go directly to the patient and talk to the vine. So you can measure the patient either by measuring the pressure or the tension inside the stems. And effectively, the vine is sucking water out of the soil and sending it up into the sky. So you can do that with a device on the left-hand side. That's called a pressure chamber. And then on the right-hand side, this is a technology we're not using yet, but it's becoming more widespread. This is actually a microchip that's embedded into the trunk of an almond orchard or an apple orchard, or in this case, a grapevine, to be able to measure the stress that the grapevine is experiencing. And then you can see at real time, when it's getting too stressed or not, then you can put more water on and it relieves the stress. And you want to have a little bit of stress when you're growing grapevines for good quality, but not too much. Otherwise, you'll reduce yields and you'll actually get raisins and shriveling and things. All right, next click. Final thing is to measure the soil. And so those on the left are some soil moisture probes. We can bury those in the soil and it can measure the amount of water at different horizons down underground. We can see where the grapevine roots are and where they're pulling water out from. And then on the right-hand side is a little picture. You can see those irrigations, that little upwards ticks. Every time I put water in, the ground, the water kicks up, and then we wait for it to decrease again, and then it kicks up again. And you can see right now that as we get towards August, we haven't irrigated for a little while and we've been holding off. Now we've got our canopy to the full size and we're letting that fruit ripen up, and now we've just given it a supplementary irrigation. So rather than just being on a schedule where we've got irrigation, we actually hold off for a long time until we need the next irrigation again. Okay, next click. And then what do we do? Well, this is a lot of little bits of information. We bring it all together. So we have platforms where we can look at both satellite imagery and soil moisture data and weather data all in the same place to come up with irrigation recommendations that make the most out of the limited water sources we have. Didn't talk about water sources very much, but we have water from several sources, so one of them is groundwater, so pumping from wells, and so that's expensive because you've got to get the electricity to pump that water out of the ground. And we also have reservoirs, and when the rivers and streams are flowing, we can take some limited amount of water out of those. It's heavily regulated. And then finally, and this is fantastic, and we've been expanding this wherever we can, we have a source of recycled water from municipalities. So Napa in the Carnaris region, which is the southern part of Napa, is a fantastic example of the city of Napa recycling the water and making some of it available to the community college and to the state hospital and to various things, but also makes it available to all the grape growers in the southern part of Napa there, so that they can not have to pump out of the groundwater and preserve, reuse that water a second time that the community has already used once. So a great example of a collaboration between the city of Napa and the growers in that region that benefit from each other. Next click, final click on this slide. So the other thing we do is satellite imagery, and you can see here this is an image from a point in time from August 1st when we actually, it's a plain image, not a satellite image, but we able to have a water stress index, and you can see that it's not as simple as just looking at one vine. or even one whole field, but you've got variability across your vineyard, depending on, you know, the soil that's underneath there and how old or diseased or healthy the vine is, and what you're growing and what the canopy is, and if you have any leaks. So we keep an eye on all of this stuff on a spatial basis to make sure that we're plugging leaks and that we're irrigating just the right amount and then seeing the stress build up over space. So I don't know if any of this, you've ever seen of these things before, but this makes our irrigation application just incredibly efficient and just exactly the right amount of targeted water to where it needed to go. Next slide. All right, I'm going to speed up a little bit. I've got 2 more slides left to go. So one of the things we do in our wineries is capture rainwater. And we have large roof areas and crush pads. We capture that and we use it. It's effectively distilled water, so it's very efficient to use in our evaporative cooling. And we can use that same water many, many more times to do cooling with than we could if it was groundwater that's full of silica and other salts. We also have a technology that we didn't invent, but we pioneered in the wine industry called pulse cooling, whereby we're able to put coolant into a tank and then let it warm up before we pulse the next batch of cooling in. Right now, it's kind of like the taps are open all the time. And so that's a pretty inefficient process. And so we have got a huge bump in efficiency about our cooling demands by using this pulse cooling method. It also probably makes your wines better too, because you know, all the tanks are able to get the cooling they need in a winery if they're all pulsing independently, versus if all of them are on all the time, then you normally have the tank at the end of the road that's getting hotter than you want it to. Next slide. Other things we do, and not exactly water related, but we have solar hot water. So talking about offsetting electricity demands, it's not just getting rid of natural gas and going to heat pumps, but also we're able to go to solar hot water. So we've got one of the largest installations in California of solar hot water that powers our hot water for our bottling center down in the town of Sonoma. And then this one here, fluidized bed, which is, you know, probably the most technical of the lot, and it's the only version of this in the world. But we're able to effectively, once we've rolled out this technology, turn up the thermostat on all of our wineries. What it does is means we don't need to chill our wine tanks down in order to stabilize that wine before sending it to you as customers. We're able to run things warmer, and obviously that has huge energy savings and huge water savings because we're not having all that cooling. And the other thing that's great about it is what we generate in this is tartaric acid, so potassium bitartrate crystals, which we can then reuse. So we have this wonderful circular economy thing that's going on. Okay, that's it. So please feel free to jump in with any questions at the end. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Will. That was a really fascinating insight into all of the sophisticated technologies you all are using and which we don't see when we visit a winery for a tasting. So thank you for that. Last but not least, we'd like to welcome Julia Hatton, President and Chief Executive Officer for the Rising Sun Center for Opportunity. Take it away, Julia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. This might seem like a little bit of a non sequitur, what I'm going to talk about today. But I think the things that you're hearing about today impact all of us, right? But they impact frontline communities, low-income communities, and communities of color first and worst, right? So I'm going to add another dimension to the conversation on the energy and water crisis, and that's, you can call it the equity crisis. And my hope today is to provide a couple of on-the-ground examples of approaches that center equity and that allow us to address these intersectional issues simultaneously. Next slide, please. So I'll start with some background on the organization I've been with for the past 9 years and that I now lead. Rising Sun's a nonprofit community-based organization. And we build career pathways for economic equity and climate resilience, and we've been doing that since 1994. So workforce development is the primary mechanism by which we deliver on that mission. So we've got job training and employment programs for youth and adults in the Bay Area and in San Joaquin County, and those programs support individual and community resiliency, combat climate change, and build economic equity. Next slide. So I'm biased, of course, but to me, there are several things that make Rising Sun special. So one is our triple focus mission on the intersection of workforce, climate, and equity. The other is our communities. So we prioritize opportunity youth, which are youth who are disconnected from work or school, women, people with insufficient incomes, and individuals in reentry, or those who are impacted by the justice system. And within that, we take a whole person strengths-based approach to working with the folks in our program. And our programs are designed with direct input from those participants, as well as the larger community, including crucially employers. The last sort of thing that I think makes this unique is our focus on high road careers and pathways, quality jobs, right, that offer family sustaining wages and benefits. And we've got specific expertise in the energy efficiency industry and in the building and construction trades, with emerging expertise in residential building decarbonization and electrification. Next slide. So Rising Sun runs two main workforce programs, Climate Careers and Opportunity Build, and I'll tell you a little bit about both. Each uses a different model and serves a different age group. So Opportunity Build is a training and placement pre-apprenticeship program for adults who have barriers to employment, ages 18 and up. And this model is about removing those barriers, getting people into jobs they can live on, and building long-term careers and wealth, right? Climate Careers, our youth program, uses a direct employment model. So we hire and train youth from low-income households. They're ages 15 to 24, and they work for us as energy specialists in their own local communities, and they install energy efficiency and water efficiency measures in local homes. So this is about preparing youth for the world of work through direct paid experience and career exploration. And on the next slide, I'll get into a little bit more about each program. So Climate Careers, as I mentioned, is our direct employment program for youth, and we've been running this one for over 20 years. It's been partially funded by utility ratepayers since 2006, so through PG&E until this year, through Bay Run since 2019, by MCE in several years, and we've also had longtime partnerships with water districts like MMWD. So since 2000, Climate Careers has trained and employed hundreds of local youth to provide residents with free energy efficiency and water conservation services each year. These are called greenhouse calls, and they're delivered either in person or virtually by the youth that Rising Sun employs. So this is a social enterprise model, right, where youth are gaining real world paid work experience as energy specialists. They participate in professional development workshops and coaching. They're fighting climate change, and they're helping impacted residents of their communities to save energy and money. And then Rising Sun helps them secure paid internships at other companies and organizations working for a more climate resilient future. All of the youth I mentioned are ages 15 to 24. They're all from low-income households. We offer wages of $16 to $18 an hour. Youth can also come back each year in positions of greater responsibility, so we're building in a little bit of a career pathway or ladder there. And some become summer managers, some even become Rising Sun staff. Next slide. A little bit more about Climate Careers. So I spoke to the youth-centered workforce development element, but it's also an energy and water savings program, right, that specifically works with those hit first and worst by the energy and water crises, and that happens to be primarily low-income communities of color. So these communities really need to be prioritized and centered in climate solutions, and the work needs to be done with, by, and for those who are most impacted. So in the case of Climate Careers, this means paying local youth in these communities to help and work in their own communities. And it also means investing in outreach and making it easy to participate in the program as a resident, making it easy to save energy and water. So I know I'm pretty tight on time. But when it comes to outreach, I think the key takeaways here are just, you have to really invest in outreach. You have to work with trusted partners. Outreach tasks and programs need to be delivered in language, and outreach needs to be targeted towards the communities you really want to reach. And it has to be easy to participate. You know, our greenhouse call program is free, and it still is difficult to get people to accept free services, free water conservation services. So you have to really remove and think intentionally about taking away anything that might make it difficult to participate, whether it's requiring income documentation or landlord permission or filling out a gazillion forms. Right? You want to try and just make it easy for people to do the right thing. Next slide. I also want to touch on Rising Sun's pre-apprenticeship training program for adults, which is called Opportunity Build. Opportunity Build has offered a pathway out of poverty for nearly 1,000 people since 2009 through training for high road careers. Again, because I want to allow time for questions for the whole group, I'll just say that this is an 11-week training program, but it's really at least a 12-month program because of all the wraparound and supportive services that are provided in addition to the training. This model is about preparing people for careers in construction, helping them get into those careers and helping them stay in and succeed in and grow in those jobs. We have a significant focus on women and also on folks in reentry. Next slide, please. So I think the final thing I want to talk about, and this again might seem tangential to the conversation about our water crisis, but it's job quality. And the reason that I think this is relevant to this conversation is that, you know, we're talking about investing in solutions to these climate crises, right? And investing in a resilient future. And that means that we have an opportunity to simultaneously support job creation and economic equity if we can look at job quality and justice and sort of make that the foundation of our approach. So if you think about investment in these solutions, you tend to think about job creation, but those jobs that are created have to be ones that people don't just survive on, but that they can live on and thrive on. I think this is particularly important in the context of our recovery from COVID as well. So the quick story that I usually tell is that Opportunity Build used to be known as Green Energy Training Services. It was 2009. It was the era days. And we were training and placing our program participants into weatherization and home performance and solar jobs, all things that were great for the environment, right? Unfortunately, we found out that those jobs weren't good jobs, especially at the entry level, right? The wages were low, there weren't any benefits, no upward mobility. And so green jobs were actually keeping people in poverty. So that is the thing that we want to avoid, right? So at Rising Sun, we pivoted, started focusing on union careers in construction and the building trades. But that, you know, that is kind of another perspective to look at these types of investments and solutions through is through the lens of job quality and what types of opportunities are we providing for people, especially people who are most impacted, and how can we kind of maximize this moment to support both economic equity and climate resilience. I will go ahead and stop there. You can put up the next slide so folks can see my contact information, and I'm happy to answer any questions either here or offline. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Julia. I'm always so inspired to hear about the work of Rising Sun in really making sure that our green revolution touches all communities and benefits folks both on the customer side as well as the industry side and the supply side of our green revolution. I'd now like to invite all of our panelists to turn on their video. We have a few minutes left for questions, and I want to start with one from Jody that I think may be best directed to Paul. We had a similar presentation to this one earlier in the week at the Contra Costa County Sustainability Commission. EBMUD is also planning on accessing Freeport. How can we be sure that all these backup supplies will be there for all who are looking for them?
That's a good question. So what we do know that the Freeport capacity is about 100 million gallons per day. And at the moment, indications are that East Bay Mud would not be using that full capacity. So in the case of this first pass, it looks like it's available. Even if East Bay Mud were using the full capacity, or if for some reason, right, the Freeport facility was not available, the water could continue down the Sacramento to the Delta and be withdrawn by the Contra Costa Water District at one of their intakes from the Delta. And from there, the water would be or could be transported to the East Bay Mud facilities and then over to Marin that way.
Thank you, Paul. Moving into sort of the nexus of water and energy, a question: has anyone performed a comprehensive study of the electric consumption and generation of all the state's water systems, large and small, and the potential to load shift and to use existing facilities for pumped storage at all scales?
This is Mark Rothletter. I'm sorry, I can't put my video back on, but there's various studies that occur. California Energy Commission does a forecast of all demand every year, and they do incorporate the expected, including agricultural pump load demand. But I think the question is a little bit more broader, because I think it's asking the question, is there opportunity to shift load? And there definitely is, and I think part of that was having time of use rates and being able to signal and make aware when to shift the load from those evening peak hours to maybe closer to the middle of the day. Time of use rates help do that. And there is a significant opportunity to shift that load away from the most critical hours.
Thanks, Mark. All of those small load shifting efforts really add up to make a big difference across our electric grid. I want to turn to Julia for a question, which is a little personal to me. Several MCE staff began their careers through the Climate Careers program, so big thanks for that. The question is, how can we support getting more people involved in climate careers and opportunity build to create a more sustainable future and have more sustainable careers for folks?
Oh, thank you for asking that question. And yeah, maybe Efren's listening and others, Grace. You know, I think a part of it is just about getting the word out. A lot of how Rising Sun does our recruitment for programs is grassroots and also word of mouth. If you know a young person who is passionate about environmental justice, who is passionate about you know, building a career out of this work, send them our way. You know, go to risingsunop.org and take a look and apply for our energy specialist positions. And then on the opportunity build side, if you know someone who is interested in starting a career in construction, or someone who is interested, maybe someone who's just not happy with where they are with their current career and wants to start something new where they can really build a future, and they like working with their hands, you know, let us know about that. And that could be a great fit for opportunity build as well. So, or, you know, always feel free to email me or anybody on our website. You can find out more information.
Thank you, Julia. I think we've got time for one last question here that we'll sneak in. If most California agricultural farmers utilized similar water efficiency irrigation technologies as you talked about, Will, wouldn't that result in significant California water demand savings? So much so that California water supplies might even be adequate during severe droughts. How much room is there for significant water efficiency improvement across other parts of California agriculture?
I mean, that's a great question. I am not an expert on all California agriculture, obviously, so this is speaking from what I know. But most of those technologies that I pointed out there are not at all exclusive to the wine industry. So series imaging is actually heavily used in the almond industry to help kind of pick out that same kind of thing. Some of those technologies we had coming from Australia. Excuse me, I'm sorry about this. Too many Zoom meetings going on at once. And so I think there's significant opportunity there. Drip irrigation is great, and we'll see more and more crops go to drip and drip tape. That makes it very efficient. And I think there's another opportunity that's really interesting that came up from Mark, which is that whole time of use thing. It's better to irrigate at certain times of day because you don't have so much of that water kind of go up into the atmosphere and lose it. So both, I think the time of use thing could benefit users in other places. And we could make sure that we're not irrigating at times when you guys need the electricity for other things. And that could be a very good opportunity. But I think technology will continue to spread as water taps keep getting tightened. I think we'll see more and more of those come along, and there'll be a price to every drop of water. So as that goes up, people will be more careful with it.
Thank you so much, Will. Unfortunately, we are out of time today. We're a little over time for our hour here today. So just as a reminder, we will be sharing out a follow-up email with all of the PowerPoint presentations, so you can dig into all of the great details that our presenters shared. I want to extend a very special thank you to Mark, Paul, Julia, and Will, and to everyone who was able to join our incredibly important and timely conversation today. And we look forward to seeing everyone at our next Power Hour. Thank you all so much for joining.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.